the 5th of March, following evidence that was garnered at Senate estimates, Senator Mackenzie put out a statement in which she said, "I did not make any changes or annotations to this brief or its attachments after 4 April 2019. My expectation was that the brief would be processed in a timely and appropriate manner. Nevertheless, changes were made and administrative errors occurred in processing the brief." Did you take any action once that statement was issued, or did you just sort of raise your eyebrows and move on?
I have not been asked to do anything in relation to that statement, Senator.
Okay, so you wouldn't proactively see that and go, this is something that, as the Secretary of the PM&C, that we should have a look at?
No. I mean, in terms of the task I was given,
but this is
back to this. It was a task to look at the minister's conduct and whether it was in accordance with the Statement of Ministerial Standards. The result of that inquiry and what happened to the minister are there for the public record, for the information that came out. If there was an issue of any action after caretaker, I would have thought that the department itself, who made the judgment, do those things. Again, it was not something that I've either been asked. I'm not aware of any follow-up advice from any of the departments about this. So I'm therefore not subject to any request, inquiry, or coming to me in terms of having a look at what happened.
Okay, so I understand this happened after your report, so it's separate to your report. This happened in early March, but you saw no reason following, I think, like a pretty startling statement from the former minister to say that she had no knowledge that this had happened, and just to shrug of the shoulders.
Well, I don't sort of have own motion powers to do things.
But this happened during caretaker provisions.
Well, lots of things happen during caretaker provisions, Senator.
So are there other instances where approvals were made for funding that the ministers weren't aware of during caretaker?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay, so it doesn't happen then? This was a
No, you're mixing up two things. It's one, what I'm aware of, and two, does it happen? I mean, caretaker provisions do not stop government working.
No, but this was a brief that was signed off before caretaker, but changes were made and the minister wasn't aware. Is that a pretty unique circumstance?
I can't answer that question.
Okay. And do you know who did make those changes?
No, I do not.
Okay, and you've never felt the inclination that this is something that, as head of Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, you should have a look at?
No.
Okay, and would there be a question around, given the minister said that she had no knowledge at the time, that who would actually have the legal authority to make changes after the brief had been signed?
Well, I think they would be questions better addressed at the portfolio involved. I mean, I was not involved in any of those decisions. You are talking to someone who has no knowledge of these things. It would be best for your inquiries to be aimed actually at the portfolio involved, because they would be across what happened.
Sure,
I'm not.
I was just asking questions about when this became public, whether it prompted you to take any action at all, and the answer to that is
no.
Okay, thank you. Senator Gallagher?
Yeah, sorry, just a couple of follow-up. Mr. Gaetjens, do you issue the caretaker guidelines? Are they issued under the head of the public service? They would be, wouldn't they? It's probably something to know.
I think they're issued by the department.
Yeah.
But under your name?
Not so far.
No, I'm aware of that, but I'm interested going forward. So
Well,
you would issue caretaker...
I can check that out.
Okay.
Under notice.
But can you... Caretaker guidelines tend to be issued in the lead up to elections. Are they reviewed and issued? Is that Mr. Reid? Is that how it's done?
Reid or Ms. Foster would probably have been there longer than me.
Senator, that's right. They're usually reconsidered and reissued in the lead up to an election. They're issued by the department, not under the name of the secretary.
Right. And in terms of what we now know happened in relation to this $40 million of expenditure that was approved after caretaker commenced, and I accept that announcements can be made, but I wasn't aware that funding could be determined or not, would not be good in line with the conventions for funding to be decided. Are you going to make any changes to the caretaker guidelines based on what we've learnt through this saga?
Senator, we'll look at the guidelines in light of all of the current circumstances prior to the next election.
And will training be provided to staff, including members of parliament staff, about the adherence to the guidelines?
Senator, we typically hold information sessions for public servants, and we will also brief. So I think both Mr. Reid and I have been involved in briefing chiefs of staff.
And did that happen in the lead up to the last election?
Yes, it did.
Okay, so they were briefed. Staff, ministerial staff, would have been briefed and trained about the proper use of caretaker conventions in the lead up to last election.
Senator, we provided a brief on the application of the guidelines.
Do you think the allocation of $40 million after caretaker kicked in is in adherence with the caretaker conventions?
Senator, as Mr. Gaetjens has said, we have not reviewed that.
Oh, come on. You're the Prime Minister and Cabinet. You're the central agency, the head of the public service, the one that sets the standard. And you're telling me that no one has had a look at this? Mr. Gaetjens, what on earth is going on? I mean, how can people have trust in this if this is the way your department is going to handle potential breaches of caretaker conventions? It's a pretty easy question. Is the determining and allocating of $40 million after caretaker starts adhering to the caretaker conventions?
Now that would, I've said before, in the terms of the context, the scale, sensitivity, again, that would be a point of context. And the portfolio would be the ones to actually examine it.
So your message to ministerial staff and public service is spend away, no problem.
That's not my message at all, Senator. That's your comment.
Okay.
All right, it being 10:30, it's the conclusion of this session. Thank you for your evidence today, Mr. Gaetjens, Ms. Foster and Mr. Reid. If you have taken questions on notice, the committee will report to the Senate by 8 December 2020 and request that answers to questions